Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the speakers that are here today and the few at the moment guests. This is really, as it's turning out to be, a bit of a soft launch for hopefully what will be an annual conference to do with digital cultural heritage interpretation and relevant areas of 3D visualization and development work, immersive technologies, etc. So hopefully it will become a bit of a platform that we can all come back to each year and discuss what's going on with this very important growing industry. So our guest speakers, keynote speakers for today, and I'm not sure how many of you have been into Winchester to the 878 AD exhibition and tour, but these two people have had an awful lot to do with it. So they're hopefully, rather than me to say, they're going to describe what they've done with 878 AD. Thank you very much. This is Ryan Lavelle and Amy Jane. Thank you.
Okay, so you may be thinking, if you're not familiar with it, what is 878 AD? It's got some fantastic branding on it, for sure. But it is if this is going to work, it is going to work. That's exciting. It is a concept that fuses museum interpretation with a modern digital twist in order to recreate 9th century Winchester. It's a visitor experience of two halves. So you've got what would be a more traditional museum experience that's augmented with some wonderful technology. And then it's followed by a digital walking tour app that allows you to carry Anglo-Saxon Winchester in your pocket, which is just a fantastic thing. And the story revolves around the Battle of Edington, which was fought in May, this time sort of what's that, 1,000 years ago or so, this time in May 878. And it was between Alfred the Great, although he wasn't great at that point, perhaps this was the thing that made him great, and the Viking leader Guthrum. It was certainly, I think we'd like to let it be known a little bit more that this was a real turning point in the history of the British Isles. So here you've got a little image of what the main sort of museum experience looks like. And then a little sort of taster of the walking tour app. But how did it come to be? It's a fantastic project, and I think Ryan can give us some information about that.
Thanks, yes, yeah. So I've come to this from the perspective of being a historical advisor for the project, and I came to it with the experience of having provided consultancy historical advice for the Last Kingdom TV series a few years ago. The final bit of it was released quite recently, so that sort of put me in a good position for people to be interested in what I do and what I can provide. And I think synchronicity is really the sort of key point here, in that when Hampshire Cultural Trust was starting to think a few years ago, about 7 or 8 years ago, that really we need to do something in Winchester about the early medieval heritage of the city of Winchester, because Winchester's associated with Alfred, of course. We have the wonderful statue of Alfred for visitors to Winchester. And I think, oh yeah, what is from the Anglo-Saxon period that we can kind of understand and visualize from the period, and that's the kind of problems that have been encountered. And they started to have regular meetings involving various people from Hampshire Cultural Trust, where they were discussing ways about representing the history of Winchester. And I've been invited to a number of these meetings. And this is synchronicity, really. This is around the same time Ubisoft had started to think about a new element in the Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Assassin's Creed video game series, and they contacted me. I think it was around 2018, asking if I could be involved to give some advice to some of the team on what was then a top secret project, and I was, I had to sign various NDAs, and the university had to kind of engage with the various non-disclosure agreements and get them seen by lawyers and things like that. So they asked me if I could provide some advice as to helping them to understand Anglo-Saxon Wessex in the 9th century. So the thing about Ubisoft is that they get in lots of different experts for different things. They had a Viking expert, they had a Scandinavian language expert, they had experts for other elements of early medieval Britain as well. So I was one of a number of people, unlike with the Last Kingdom, where I was the kind of main go-to person. But it made me feel very important, and it was pretty cool at the time. But I had to be really quiet about it. But at the same time, Hampshire Cultural Trust were kind of saying, "Oh, what can we do about Winchester here?" And I was like, okay. And at some point, because Hampshire Cultural Trust were kind of quite ready to discuss what they were doing, I was able to say to people at Ubisoft, look, I'm working with people at Hampshire Cultural Trust who are doing some of the same things as you. Can I get you people to talk to one another? And the wonderful thing about it was that they came together and they discussed the possibilities. And this led to collaboration over a thing called the Discovery Tour, which is on our slide here, which is the kind of educational version of the Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where educational sort of missions can be played out, and the players can learn things like about Stonehenge, obviously not an Anglo-Saxon monument, but it was there in the early Middle Ages, and it's part of the landscape of Wessex. So with that Hampshire Cultural Trust and Ubisoft collaboration that was going on for the Discovery Tour, when the Assassin's Creed Valhalla game came out, HCT, Hampshire Cultural Trust, felt that they could explore setting up something that would actually bring the digital world in with with somewhere that people can visit, the sort of traditional footfall visitor sort of thing that HCT are so good at, as Amy explained about what 878 AD. At that point, it was just the Alfred project.
Yes, it was. Yes, and then yes, or the project for a while, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, it didn't have a name, but and then it was a response to a gap really that's within the sort of the heritage landscape of Winchester, isn't it? Because you've got a city that is very much Anglo-Saxon, but there's no proof. It's quite a Georgian city. There's lots of sort of Victorian architecture, but the Saxons have kind of disappeared, and it was about sort of reinserting them back into the landscape of the city, wasn't it? And leaving people with the sense that actually this is Alfred's city. This isn't, this isn't the modern city that you see. There's actually so much of it that is still Saxon, and that was really wonderful, wasn't it?
Yeah, so sort of. So things essentially were green lighted at the height of the pandemic.
Yes.
Basically, that sort of wonderful sort of vision to be able to say, well, we're going to get out of this lockdown, and when that happens, people are going to want to come to visit centres and put on some kind of new place, essentially. So they greenlighted the development of the ideas and brought together a team. So I was approached to be the historical consultant for it, and others, the sort of main people on the team, Bill Lucas, who's also at Winchester University for an educational consultancy perspective, and Patrick Ottaway, who's got years of experience as an archaeologist in the city of Winchester as an archaeological consultant, and then some wonderful people who were brought in for specialist things like music. Lucianne Taylor at Southampton, Eric Lacey came in to help with aspects of the Old English language as well. So there's a real kind of buzz about the synchronicity of talents for that, and doing this during lockdown kind of made this happen because it was a virtual, sort of regular virtual meetings and discussing ideas. Because we come together in that virtual space, we could sort of discuss a I sense a sort of greater freedom of discussion, essentially.
And the regularity, wasn't it,
yes.
as well? Because you can't get that many people in a room generally anymore, and certainly not before that. But we had people from all over the country, didn't we? Patrick was often up in New York, wasn't he? And we could have those discussions regularly, and even just sort of simple points like when we're going through the scripts, which we'll discuss later. But having that ability to sort of just, I don't know, call you on Teams and be like, what do you think about this? That was really kind of freeing. And I think it helped to make the project as good as it could be.
So Amy's going to speak about the organisation from Hampshire Cultural Trust's perspective. There was one last thing.
Yes, the reliquary.
Which
is a shining centrepiece, really, of sort of the of certainly our collection. Well, the collection we look after within Hampshire Cultural Trust, and then it had a prominent place, didn't it, within the Discovery Tour, and is a central part of the 878 AD experience, and really benefits from loads of technology, doesn't it?
So to explain a little bit about the Winchester reliquary before we get on to organisational things. It's a 9th century object that was found actually by a team working with Patrick
Patrick,
in the 1970s in excavations in Winchester. And a reliquary is an object that holds a relic of a saint, which thought to hold the relic of a saint because it is the sort of design of a typical 8th or 9th century reliquary object. And it was a precious object, but it had been discarded in the Anglo-Saxon period down a rubbish pit. And so this kind of fascinating silver gilt object, essentially silver-plated object with a wooden core, became this kind of object of fascination. It has been an attraction in the City Museum, but it's given that extra element of interest as a result of its inclusion as a gameable object in the Discovery Tour. So it plays a part in the game, partly by being
it's much bigger. It's only probably about this big, isn't it? But it's huge in the game, so the character can pick it up and engage with it. But that element of what happened to this object, it's a really precious religious object, and yet we found it in such bizarre Spartan circumstances, and that was a real sort of narrative driver, because we got the opportunity to test, well, what happened to it then? Are there the multiple reasons? Did someone steal it? Was it lost? What did the Vikings come in and carry it off and lose it on the way? And then that sort of ability to play with history, I think, was really wonderful, and it was sort of a great setting within which to do that, when we could take advantage of the wonderful visuals.
So the real object is there in the exhibition, along with the graphical images in a really impressive display environment as well. But it also plays a role in terms of a kind of gamified elements in the augmented reality app as well. So there's all sorts of possibilities that were unlocked by this here.
Yeah, it really makes sort of the most of a wonderful object, doesn't it? And it gets to show it off, which is what it deserves. But we couldn't have really done any of this without having such wonderful collaborators, because the project from the outset was really, really ambitious, and we needed people who were equally as keen to kind of rise to that challenge and drive it forward and make it as good as it could be. So Ubisoft, the Hampshire Cultural Trust, was sort of the first partnership that Ryan made possible, and then we thought to ourselves, well, you've got to make the experience, and so Sana are just the masters of visitor attractions, and so they were the natural place to go to build the world of 9th century Winchester. And then in terms of the app, we looked to Sugar Creative, who are just sort of technical wizards with this sort of thing, taking advantage of all of this wonderful augmented reality technology, and they really helped to build sort of the skeleton of what 9th century Winchester actually looks like. But that world was sort of unpopulated to a certain extent, and we also needed to encourage visitors to actually take that leap, because the entire sort of, I guess, entryway into the exhibition situation and then going into the app is that you've got to believe that you step back in time. And the best way to do that is to encounter people from Winchester. And so we worked with Play to the Crowd to bring in this fantastic cohort of actors who quickly took on this mantle of the 9th century people of the city, and they are the first people you encounter when you first sort of come through the doors. But none of this could have been possible at all, I don't think, without the expertise of yourself and Patrick and Bill and everybody else that was involved, because we just needed to sort of, as much as we wanted to make it a fun, engaging experience, it also needed to be really good history, because this is the first time really in a big way that 9th century Winchester was being sort of brought to people, wasn't it? But specifically in the city. And so you were vital, absolutely essential when it came to the script writing, which was one of the most collaborative bits of the entire project, because we needed scripts for the app, for the main experience, and for the actors themselves to bring it all to life. But what we wanted to achieve needed to be balanced with really, really good historical research. And we wanted to create this idea of the Saxon period that was really up to date and really modern, that foregrounded the people that usually get left out of the narrative, because it sometimes occasionally feels like it's very much armies populated by warring men. And we wanted to bring that, but also bring in the women of the city, the people who were unfortunately enslaved at this time, and children and other voices who were all here, so that it felt like a really believable world. But we also needed to balance that, as well as the history. It needed to be accessible to everyone, and it needed to be something that everybody and anybody could get something out of and enjoy. So it made it a really kind of complex project, didn't it, in terms of pitching it at the right level, and getting it right, wasn't it?
Yeah, so there's this thing of the interactions of the imagination of the scripts, and which Amy played a major role actually. she's sort of saying this was done. It was, you know, we have one of the major script writers here, but there's the element of the interaction, of the imagination with people like actors playing the parts of 9th century people, alongside the traditional elements of museum display as well. But there was even a twist with the museum display, in presenting things in the museum. So a lot of the captions in the museum were written as if they were from people from the 9th century.
Yeah, it was given a definite voice, wasn't it? Because there was also, we sort of, I suppose it was semi-deliberate, wasn't it? It kind of, it felt more organic, but we sort of introduced a problematic narrator, really, in the role of Ethelflaed. And she had a very particular opinion on matters, didn't she? And her voice was carried through the entire narrative sequence, really, wasn't it? And it made it sort of an interesting echo to have through it, because you were being presented with good, robust history, but it was with a spin of opinion, wasn't it? And a particular kind of Saxon viewpoint at times, wasn't it? And I think that made it interesting, because it made it a challenging narrative for people to approach. It wasn't just that you went into kind of a passive museum and interacted with a display that was quite dispassionate. It was a voice that had an opinion about things that were going on. And then certainly with the app, which deals with the aftermath of the Battle of Edington and what happens afterwards. How does it, well, spoilers, but he does win, Alfred. So it's sort of, it looks at how he builds England effectively, but it's not him, it's not about him, it's about the people. And her voice is very central into that, and she's sort of, in the entire piece is sort of chronicled by her, isn't it, in that chronicle style. And having that woman's voice throughout. Sarah Parish did the vocals for us, which was just wonderful. It was really sort of innovative, wasn't it, and unusual, I think.
Yeah, and there's a kind of integrity to it as a project as well, in terms of having the voice from that period that also feeds into the art and feeds into the representation of the place. So there's a kind of package to the whole thing, which kind of took it away from a traditional museum, whatever a traditional museum is these days, but he's sort of playing around with different representations from the past, and for me that was very exciting, because it's something that I've, ever since I was an undergraduate, there was always part of me that wanted to have some input into museum representations, and this was a kind of feeling that I can influence the museum in some ways, but that's the thing for an advisor or a consultant, is you can never sort of fully shape things. You could, you might have a vision of how things could appear in your head, but you've got to leave it to the experts to think about how it's got to end up. And there's an element to this. And I was thinking, or I do think about this. There's an element to this of being like the experience of being a dissertation supervisor for the academics in the room. Of giving guidance, but ultimately the project is the people who are involved in establishing the project and setting it up and seeing it through to fruition. But there's still a certain sense of pride in the achievements of the people that you've worked with for that. Yes, but there were many interesting discussions about the representation of history and how that representation of history could engage both creatively and technologically in terms of working with the app developers, Sugar, for example, and Sana, and how they used the assets from Ubisoft. And I think that's the sort of crucial thing, is that we were sort of playing with different audiences here, because part of the audience was also the fans of the Assassin's Creed series and video gamers, but also were having to think about how this is representing history and archaeology as well.
And there was a really sort of interesting thing that we sort of tackled, was the different dwell times with each phase of the experience, because there's, I don't know what the exact numbers is, but there's a certain amount of time that someone will spend staring at an exhibition board. And that depends on their interest, of course, but there is an average. And that certainly is different when they're placed in front of a film, and definitely different when they've got an app. And you're not necessarily going to read an entire academic essay about St Mary's Abbey while you're stood in the middle of Winchester. So we had to deal with that different kind of sort of pitch levels as well, didn't we, of how much they're going to read and take in, and what do we actually want people to understand ultimately. If they don't read anything, which is a terrible thought, but if they do, are they still going to come out with an idea? And that sort of that ability to introduce people to a new pantheon of characters was fantastic, wasn't it? Because everybody's familiar with the Tudors, but less so possibly the House of Wessex, and that opportunity to kind of give people something different and have fresh history was really exciting, and hopefully people were left, that's my hope anyway, with the sense that it really is Anglo-Saxon Winchester, and it's Alfred's Winchester, and that he was here, he was really here, but it's often not. But the people that were in the city experienced this really scary period in history, and actually came out a lot stronger for it. And it's been really wonderfully received, which has been fantastic. So here's just a couple of TripAdvisor reviews from last month, and people have really engaged with it, despite the dreadful weather we've had, interestingly, because the app lynches quite heavily on whether or not you can get outside. But people have really loved it, and that's been a treat. To think that we've actually effectively fulfilled the brief, haven't we, and succeeded in introducing people, or reintroducing them, really, I suppose, into a world that seems really far away, but actually there's something essential about humans that I think they see in the people they interact with over the course of the experience. Yeah.
No, I think that
that
kind of closes it.
Yes.
Time for questions.
Yeah, we've still got time for questions, which is good.
Oh.
Hello.
Hello, I know Ryan, but I'm Myra Wilkinson. I'm a Research and Engagement Officer at the University. Congratulations on an amazing attraction and fantastic collaboration. Just wondering, the last slide said the story so far, so just kind of wondering what's next. What's next for 878 AD? I'm thinking particularly, ahead in issues and things like the Winchester Heritage Open Days, which theme this year is creativity, which of course fits the bill perfectly. So I'm just wondering what the plans are for that, whether you've got anything in particular planned, or you can join up on that. just really, or whether you're thinking of also, because you said, you know, there is no visible, tangible evidence for Anglo-Saxon Winchester, certainly not on the face of it, all done Winchester. Are there plans, for instance, also to create something like a walking tour in the same way that we collaborated on medieval Jewish Winchester, where people can show themselves around and learn about all the different sites and locations all around Winchester that represent that period in that particular group, and plans in that direction? Generic.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much I can actually say.
Yeah, how much are you allowed to say?
I don't know, no one's told me.
Oh, yeah, we are being recorded, so I'm
Um,
not quite sure whether there's a kind of Chatham House rules about this or not.
Sure. Well, I can certainly speak from what I'd like to see, and I would definitely like for us to expand and really make kind of Winchester a byword for Anglo-Saxon life, and certainly I think the walking tour was in a slightly different way meant to be very much like the Jewish Trail and those elements. Obviously, there's the caveat of it being paid for, so it makes it a little bit less accessible, perhaps, but certainly. I don't know what the plans are for Winchester Heritage Open Days, but I should think we would want to get involved, most definitely, because it's that idea of bringing history, isn't it, and making it free and accessible and wonderful for people to access. And I think that's certainly what the ambition is, because it doesn't make sense for it not to be, does it, really?
Yes.
And yeah, I think the sheer amount of objects that Winchester has as well, relating to this period and to the later Anglo-Saxon period. It's much better after the 10th century,
Yeah,
which was the trouble.
That was
that
was the thing about it, but yeah, we can discuss that later.
But we've got a real opportunity to show off everything that we have, and in many ways, I suppose, I'm possibly allowed to say, 878 AD is kind of a test case for that in a sense, because it's the first time something has wholly Anglo-Saxon has been put to the market, I guess, to the heritage market. It pops up in the museums, and obviously the cathedral's got wonderful elements to it with the Kings and Scribes exhibition, but it's not the sole focus of anything. And so it's a way of saying, well, actually, we've got demonstrable proof that people are into this, that the combination of the digital, the Ubisoft assets, and really, really good history and great objects works. And I think you can take that forward and do something really ambitious, and I hope we get the opportunity to, because the desire is definitely there, even if it's just me and you and yourself, Ryan. It would be brilliant. Well, exactly.
It's popular, isn't it? And we are known for it. I also like what you were talking about, the sort of under-highlighted people, like the sort of battles. The women, the slaves, the children, the animals, I don't know, there's different directions you can jump in with it, which again we can work with and run with.
Yeah.
We can, highlight the women, and we can do something together for the Women's Open, International Women's Day.
Yeah, because I think certainly from my point of view, I wanted a story that because my background is history, so and I sort of was gently guided into doing the scripts. And so my immediate thought was that, okay, we can't patronise the visitors. They need the whole story. They need it, whether it's kind of ugly and embarrassing and whatever it is. And we need to kind of be really strong about what happened, because people are really intelligent and they can understand stuff. They don't need to be spoon-fed. They can deal with the complicated stuff, because sometimes I'll go into museums and I think, oh gosh, you've left out something here. There's a big hole that I know is there, and people can absorb that information, and I really wanted that. And so foregrounding the people that are sometimes marginalised from the narrative was the best way of doing it, because you get the full colour of Anglo-Saxon life. And actually colour was an interesting thing that came up, didn't it, that we really wanted to bring out, that it was a colourful place to be, because you often think of the early medieval period and it's kind of shades of beige and brown, but actually they loved colour. They loved it so much, and they had this ability to create wonderfully vivid colours. And so they were an expressive people. They were like us. They liked to laugh. They found stuff really funny. They loved riddles. they'll have games, they'll have too much beer. And if people could kind of take away that there's a little bit of them in the Anglo-Saxon world, while also having the caveat that it's a really different world, and it's a really tricky world, and there's lots of disparity and lots of unfairness. It's sort of, it was a great way to sort of bring in a really modern kind of interpretation, I think. Yeah.
So I've just got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So how far did you work with the local authority, and how far did they, is it Hampshire County Council, or is there a city thing, which I don't know. How far were they on board? So this is one question. So you thought about developing it into a TV series, so getting your pitch deck sorted for that. No, seriously,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. It's just, you think of the timeline of what you do. Schools use, so how far is it being used in schools locally? So is it part of the curriculum, and all the children visit and they download the thing and then they can use it? And have you got any figures for the number of downloads of the app? You know, the app. And lastly, have you thought about another version that would be counterfactual one? So what happens if Alfred had lost the battle? Those you can begin to play around in history and then understand the history better by looking at the counterfactuals, and you do that through the means of an experience like this.
Oh, that would be very cool. Yes. There we go. We'll go back.
Counterfactual representation. Yes, interesting.
And just to pick up on your point about the beige thing, that is because growing up, that's all you ever got in archaeology and books about everything up to the medieval period, when suddenly everyone was wearing exotic clothing.
Yeah.
Yes, they woke up one day and loved purple, didn't they?
Drawings are of huts with smoke rising, and they were bleak. I wouldn't have wanted to live there. It's utterly bleak. The sun never shone in those representations of those books. And I thought, no, they would have been days like these days, blue sky with the clouds scudding across, and so on and so forth. There's no sense of that in those kind of drawings at all.
No.
They have created a false sense of the past.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of, we wanted it to be surprising, and sort of, because whether you're familiar with the period or not, I think you will have some sort of concept of what the early medieval period maybe looks like or is like. And so every panel we did, we wanted to have this element in there where somebody looks at it and goes, oh, I didn't know that, or oh, that's weird. So it's like when we've got an object in there, a frying pan from the period, and Saxons loved crumpets and pancakes, and it's sort of that weirdness that's really human that you can kind of get on board with, because it's like, well, yeah, a bit of Marmite in the morning, fantastic, and immediately they're more lifelike to you, and that was wonderful, because it does start to kind of unpick that element that is the non-real. But in terms of local authority and bits and bobs, my involvement with that side of things was very limited, but my understanding is that they were there from the beginning, really enthusiastic at the opportunity to bring something new, and they were brilliant partners, and really wonderfully supportive, because it's so different from anything certainly that Hampshire Cultural Trust has done before, and probably we have done for the city, really. And so for them it was probably quite daunting, because it's quite a big leap, but they were pleased, I think.
The leader of the council was there at the launch. Cited a book that I've edited, which was co-edited, which was quite wonderful.
Yes, schools. The education programme is central to it, because the part of the national curriculum, they do cover the Saxons, and so often in Winchester City Museum we would have kids come in and they would know already about Alfred, and they would want to look at the middle floor, which covers the Anglo-Saxon period, and they'd have this knowledge already, and so tying that up with local schools has been really, really great, particularly sort of over the winter months. The opportunity to kind of build up the schools programme and get kids involved has been great.
Maybe a future version, you can actually have them involved in the older children in the actual development phase, because it bridges the thing between games that they play in their rooms.
Yes.
And contributing, so you would get them together and they would actually interpret objects, and their interpretation is built into an actual experience, and maybe even into a game.
Yeah.
And that's really good employability for the future and for university applications.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, certainly would be.
Can I add a thought to my colleagues' questions? Tam McDonald, by the way, from Cradle of English. Thanks very much for that. It's, your enthusiasm is infectious. A number of the points that Jeff made, I think, would be very interestingly put to your industry collaborators at Ubisoft and Assassin's Creed. So what sort of response have you had from them and feedback, and to what extent would they be jumping on Jeff's suggestions and saying, yeah, we're in that. We'll help you take this to the next stage, especially if we can get more gamers out of it.
Well, yes, yeah, quite. I don't know, you're probably more placed to.
Yeah, well, the collaboration was, because when initially I was discussing, they contacted me about it, and I thought, it all seemed so slick in terms of what they were offering. I thought, oh, they're offering a service here, and they're offering, this is going to bankrupt Hampshire Cultural Trust if they're paying for it.
Yes.
And then I appreciated that they were offering it for free, because obviously there's a kind of quid pro quo element of collaboration for this, in that Ubisoft get it benefits them because it's developing the universe of their game in some ways. It's kind of giving a real footprint to their game, and it's encouraging people to play this game for good or ill, but spend hours playing them. But I've ended up playing the game as a result.
Yeah.
So is that relationship then zero sum, that you didn't pay them, they didn't pay you?
Indeed, yeah. Well, as far as I understand, anyway, that was what I got from the presentation. I mean, I wasn't those. I'm not there at the ground in terms of the finances.
No.
I'm only quoting from a presentation which was a public presentation on it, so I'm not revealing anything that was kind of secretly discussed or anything like that. But yeah, it was pro bono.
And I think it'd be fair to say that Ubisoft, particularly with the games, they want to show that there's a robust historical bit of research behind it, that it's not that they've sort of dreamed it up, that there's real history there. And I think that's part of the discovery tour, isn't it, to show that actually the history is a learning tool, and the ability to take that then into something physically that is a museum space, and then an outdoor museum space, really, with the app, a digital one. I think was right up their alley, wasn't it, really? Yeah. Because it lends further kind of it shows how good they are, doesn't it, in terms of their historical research and backing something that's equally as well researched and carefully created. It works with what they want to do in their ambitions, doesn't it? So, yeah. But
I don't know, insofar as your question about what Ubisoft could then get and sort of use, how they could use this to develop their next project or their next product or the next iteration of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, besides my slight worry that anything that is sort of said about this project seems to kind of go, ooh, there's a suggestion, here's a rumour that X, Y, and Z is going to happen. I don't know how that can go forward, but it's something that is discussed. I gather the lines of communication between Hampshire Cultural Trust and Ubisoft are still there. I'm now no longer in that kind of special circle for it, but that's because my role has ended there. But I'd be delighted if there was more stuff.
Me too. That would be amazing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.